next up in committee, we'll move now, is Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, you will have a letter from me, which I wrote to the board in my capacity as the chair of the Drug and Alcohol Strategy Implementation Task Force. In it, we had a lively conversation about the recommendations in the report being considered by the Board of Health just last week. And during that conversation, three main points came up. First, that the conversation, both to date and going forward, needs to do a better job of including those who have been criminalized, racialized, and Indigenous peoples, sex workers, people with children in the work on drug policy. And I wanted to let you know that. A second thing that came up is that those communities need to inform any additional work that is done on establishing thresholds on any treatment programs, voluntary or involuntary, and there are very big concerns about involuntary treatment programs. And they need to be included on the conversation about any role that the police might have in the decriminalization project. And finally, we discussed at length the issue of evaluation. And you heard in some of the deputations today that if we simply evaluate this on the basis of whether we have fewer overdoses or fewer overdose deaths, we will have missed the point, and that we need to evaluate on a much broader range of issues than that. That's what I was asked to bring to you. I'd like to take a step back and think a little bit about the context for the decision we're making here. All of us in the Board of Health are used to thinking about how we should treat drugs as a health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. And that's true, but there's something even deeper we need to have in mind when we have this conversation. The current drug policies in Canada grow largely out of the American war on drugs that began in 1971. And it's worth remembering that war on drugs was a political project of Richard Nixon's. It was a political project deliberately aimed at rolling back the gains that were made in the civil rights movement and creating a political base for the Republican Party based on anti-Black racism to go forward and help them win elections. I want to quote something. This is from John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's principal advisor, talking about the war on drugs and why it came into place. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but we knew by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about drugs? Of course we did. Now, Canadians are often swamped by attitudes of what's happened in the United States, and that took place. Our current drug policies come out of that lie. And given that they've come out of that lie, they've produced the same kind of hate here. We call it stigma, but it's just plain hate. Hate for people who use drugs. Hate for people who are Black. Hate for people who are Indigenous. Hate for sex workers. Hate for the queer community. And that community of people who use drugs spent 5 decades fighting back against this. And they've evolved a way of thinking about drug policy, language about how to talk about drug policy, and recommendations to us about what to do. And decriminalizing is a key recommendation. The benefit of listening to those heroic people who have worked for 5 decades and brought us to this meeting today. This isn't an initiative that we can take credit for. It's an initiative that grew out of that oppressed community. Not only can it maybe solve the opioid and drug poisoning crisis, but maybe it can speak to some of the roots about the divisions we experience in our society today. We talk about how there have been real glaring inequities that have been brought to our attention because of the pandemic. Many of those inequities have their roots in the war on drugs. So what we're doing here today isn't just a medical response, it's an important social response that could be healing and great for our society going forward. Thank you.